state of Texas and to be the voice for the God-fearing, freedom-loving people of the Lone Star State. We have a responsibility as the Texas delegation to represent the spirit of Texas, which is one that runs to the fight.
Today on TLC Live, Texas Republicans speak about their border security plan, and Dr. Richard Sindelar, Assistant Professor, Director of Center of International Study of the University of St.Thomas, will talk about that. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to TLC Live. I'm Andrea Gomez.
And I'm Orlando Sanchez.
Big O. Good morning, Orlando.
Howdy.
Well, definitely a lot of things are happening in January with not only the Texas legislature, but also you were talking about China and other topics that also has to do with Texas and the real estate.
Well, you know, the Texas legislature meets once every 2 years. And, people have often said, thank God, but they ought to meet once every 20 years. They're doing the Lord's work up there, and they're going to tackle immigration. They're going to fix the immigration problem in the Texas House, and they're going to fix the China problem. And so I'm going to be real fascinated to see how this works. We've got other issues in Texas that the legislature actually could do something about. So I'm sort of fascinated to see how this plays out. So we want to talk to the professor from the University of St. Thomas, Professor Sindelar.
Professor, welcome. Good morning, and thanks for being with us today. I know we told you that we're gonna talk about immigration, one topic, but then you said, okay, you can jump in the other topic too.
Okay, I'm happy to give it a shot.
So here we go. The last time that immigration was seriously looked at and any amendments were made and changes were made was 1986 under Republican Ronald Reagan when we got amnesty. And I remind people that about 60% of those eligible to apply for U.S. citizenship never did. They received their green card, but did not apply for U.S. citizenship. So, I've often said Republicans need to abandon this idea that everybody wants to come here to vote and run for office, first of all. I think most immigrants, and I'll tell you, Professor, we did a poll a couple years ago of primary Republican voters in the 5 largest counties in Texas and asked them to question if they thought that granting a legal status to individuals who have a family here in the United States, and some have children that were born here, what they refer to as anchor babies, to give them a legal status, provided they never violated the criminal law, in a serious manner. They would apply. They would pay for all the costs associated with the application. It would not be a pathway to citizenship. It would just be a legal status, a documentation that you're in the country, that you're working, and it would not be forever. It would be renewable every 3-5 years just to make sure that we check the backgrounds. And that would grant them, number one, they would come out of the shadows, as Republicans like to say, and it would allow them to travel to and from their country of origin to bury their relatives and whatnot. Republicans support that. And so I'm interested to hear your perspective about this, the Texas delegation idea of how to fix the border.
Well, first of all, I think Orlando, I need to advertise where I come from, and I'm straight down the middle on immigration. Okay. And part of the reason I'm straight down the middle on immigration is they have over the years done any number of informal pollings or whip searches or whatever they call it in Congress, and discovered that there's probably a majority within the Congress as a whole to do something significant about immigration, but the two parties seem to stay split. But the answer's in the middle. And that particular example from the Texas delegation is something I've often thought about and even have talked about in talks and whatnot, that what we need to do is find that middle ground compromise that will work. And there's going to be quite a number of people on one side that are just don't want that path to citizenship and think that U.S. citizenship is something really special, and maybe those who have not entered with the proper documentation maybe shouldn't be entitled to it because they kind of cheated to get in the first place. That's kind of that American instinct showing up. But we do have to bring them out of the shadows because we don't know who they are, where they are, what they've done, unless they happen to commit a crime. And that's been something that I think would be an excellent solution, to give them what you might call a green card minus. You get a green card, but it has to be renewed, and it does not offer a path to citizenship, but it offers what these people actually, and I try not to oversimplify here, but I think you hit it with the 60%. The majority of these folks want to live in the United States and have a real job when they can't get one of those in their impoverished country. And they want the security of living in the United States rather than dealing with narcos in Mexico and criminal gangs in El Salvador. So they want what all other humans want, and that's just a safe place to be. So I think we can give that to them without the citizenship involved, and I think most people would be happy with that. Now, on the other side, you're going to have people say, oh, no, we've got to be open to everybody fully, completely, and we never seem to find enough in the middle.
I want to say that about 2016, I made a statement about what I, at the time, labeled family stabilization. It can be anything. You know, it could be, actually, there's a congresswoman out of Florida, a Cuban congresswoman, Cuban-born, I believe, that has introduced the Dignity Act, which does the same thing. It documents the undocumented that is not a criminal, that has family values, that's working, that's contributing. And Marco Rubio tried it. But here's what happens in the Republican Party on the right, the far right. The minute you even talk about any kind of adjustment to the immigration laws, we're labeled open borders. A couple of months ago, Texas Latino conservatives was involved in a race in League City, Texas, and one of the candidates was a young Hispanic woman we were supporting. Well, the opponent had a supporter that went on Facebook and said, well, let me tell you about Hispanic Republicans of Texas and Texas Latino conservatives. They're nothing more than an open borders organization. And I'm like, I looked at Andrea and it's like, holy cow, you know, I mean, no one has argued for strong border security louder over the years. My entire 32-year political career warning about open borders, which we don't support. We don't support pathway to citizenship for those that broke the law and, as you say, jumped the line. But at some point, what we've got to realize, and the Republican Party has to realize this, America is changing. Whether you like it or not, America is changing. And your tent inside, you know, you remember during the Reagan era, it was the big tent. Republicans were the big tent. We want everybody in. We want you to be a conservative. Well, now they're picking and choosing what conservatives they want in. And if you talk about any immigration reform, you're open borders. If you talk about letting fiscally conservative gay Americans in, oh, you're promoting whatever. If you talk about law-abiding, good Muslim citizens, you're for terrorism. I mean, this is just ridiculous, and that's just. I wish the party would move away from that and get back to, as you say, sort of in the middle, but on the conservative side, fiscal, good policies, which we've abandoned because. I mean, I'm just going to make an editorial comment. No one has spent more recently than the Republicans. I mean, when we had control of the White House and the U.S. House of Representatives and the Senate during the Bush era, I mean, we spent like drunken sailors. And so, it's time that they quit this press conference and photo op. It's interesting to me, during the campaign season and primaries, every Republican was at the border. When was the last time you saw a Republican at the border? Now you see Joe Biden at the border, and incidentally, he's walking in front of the fence, the wall that Donald Trump built.
But he went to the border in El Paso, but it had how many months we've been talking about the border crisis in the South Texas, and they never went to South Texas, and now they're only going to El Paso.
Now I agree, Professor, and we're going to let you jump in. I agree that Texas is in a bad spot because all the services that we provide to control or accommodate, however you want to use the word, undocumented illegal aliens comes from local property taxpayers. Their children are educated at the expense of property taxpayers. Our hospital district in Harris County is supported by property taxpayers. Our law enforcement that responds to any domestic or violent issues is property taxpayers. Our hospital district is provided by taxpayers. And social services are provided by taxpayers. So now we're having to spend a lot of resources from the state of Texas, and thank God we have a surplus, to try to reinforce the border. It's not fair to Texan taxpayers, correct? And incidentally, now New York City Mayor Adams is squealing like a stuffed pig going to the slaughterhouse because we've sent 30,000 illegal aliens up there. That's just not right.
Yeah, I'm surprised New York City can't handle 30,000 people out of how
It's
many
amazing,
millions,
isn't it?
how many
They're in a
millions they
crisis.
have.
Yeah, they're in a crisis. We've
Yeah.
absorbed several million. They got 30,000, and they're in a crisis.
Well, if we could get Congress to be proactive, they should think about much more of that spending should be reimbursed by the federal government to the extent the situation stays the same. But you mentioned the Cuban American congressman, which spun my thinking toward Cuba. And there's another thought here that's a little different than what you covered just right now. But in my opinion, Cuba, in a strange way, in the mid '90s, offered a potential, perhaps not a solution, but a way to significantly improve border security and minimize people who are risking their lives to come all the way up through the jungles to the border. Or still to this day, Cubans are beginning to come a little more over the water and risk the sharks, etc. What happened in 1994, if you remember, there was the Mariel boat lift, and there was this flood of Cubans, the same amount, 20,000 or more a month, trying to cross the Straits of Florida, many of them dying because their little raft fell apart. The Clinton administration wanted the heartfelt side of it is they didn't want to see these people risk their lives. The less heartfelt side is they had the same situation now that the Biden administration had, and even the Trump administration had before, where illegals are coming into the country and Americans politically don't like that. So Clinton's solution was to strike something called the Migratory Accord between himself and Fidel Castro at the time. And this was the catch. Before the Migratory Accord, if somebody got out to sea and beyond the 12-mile limit, they were in international waters. They were then, quote, rescued, and they were brought to Florida. The Migratory Accord said, conversely, anybody who doesn't get dry foot, as they say today, that still has wet foot, we will put them on a Coast Guard cutter, and they'll be taken back to Havana. So you're going to risk your life only to be brought back to Havana. But the key to all of this was they set up a regularized intake program similar to asylum called advanced parole at the time to bring in 25,000 Cubans a year. So instead of risking your life to cross in the water and maybe make it or maybe not make it, you went to the embassy in Havana and you filed papers to come as what's called a parolee, but it could be done the same for asylum. So what I think we should do is establish in the countries that are the sending countries asylum programs and offices and places where these people can go and apply and be processed properly. The Constitution, as you know, Orlando, says there must be due process if you get onto U.S. soil. You're supposedly entitled to due process. But as any lawyer will tell you, the question isn't really whether there's due process. The question is what process is due. If you set up a process overseas and somebody still crosses the border, my own humble opinion would be that the process would include returning them to that country and having them apply in that country at an already established base, just like people used to apply at embassy in Havana. Another example of that was Vietnam. As all the refugees fled from Vietnam, these camps were set up in Thailand and Australia and elsewhere, and asylum cases were processed. In other words, this is a long talk to say shortly, set up offshore processing where people can go safely and apply. And once they get their papers, they now come in legally. The flip side of that is the same thing as the Coast Guard. If you come in, we're going to take you back to that process. So taking your risk and getting to the border won't help you because we're going to send you back anyway. And it worked perfectly. The Cubans, until just recently, almost never tried to cross the water, and 25,000 a year, I think, are still taken in through that program. So that would offshore the asylum as a version of due process, return them there, and take away the incentive to cross the border.
But that's only one problem. And Professor, I mean, ideally it will be, and we wouldn't have this crisis and big problem that we have in the border if the law, it will be easier for people that apply in their own country, and it will be easier to get a visa for, after they review the documents and everything. I'm from Colombia, and it's so difficult to get not only an appointment with the embassy, but also to get a visa to come to this country. And I'm talking about, I have a brother that applied 5 times, and I'm a U.S. citizen. I have my parents living here, and I have a brother that never, ever were able to come here. He applied 5 times, and they denied the visa. So I think the problem is beyond the border, people crossing the border, because it's so difficult to apply. So for them, it's easier to cross the border than apply to a visa and come in a legal way. So I think it's a lot of things to fix in the immigration law.
Yeah, one thing, Andrea, I make a distinction here, and this is the key distinction. The immigration law, which would require major reform to be changed, is fairly difficult, as you described, to either get an immigrant visa or a temporary visa to visit the United States. That's true. But what I'm describing is a separate system known as an asylum system and an advanced parole system that is separate from that. And in Havana, when I did my temporary duty in Havana to help administer that program, we had a completely separate building for that. We had a completely separate mailing system where it came in separately. So that would be something totally separated out where and people could go, and they can't guarantee you can get into the country just because you apply with the papers, but it at least gives you a place to apply for asylum without having to take the hard road to the border, and it's separated out and separate rules apply. Now it's just asylum rules. Are you an economic migrant, or are you threatened by gangs? If you are, you don't have to have a law degree or an advanced degree to get a special visa, or you don't have to have family to get the visa. You're threatened, you may come on in already. And I mentioned Vietnam as well. That's another example of these offshore places that could be set up special, separate from the visa system, easier to approach, easier to use, no guarantee. And Andrea, you're exactly right. There's going to be a certain number of people that aren't going to trust the system or aren't going to want to wait for a month or two for papers to be processed. So they're still going to take the risk. But the key here is we can't solve it, but we can diminish it. So instead of 2.7 million crossing the border like last year, maybe it's only 100,000 or so, because most of them are doing it at home. So we help minimize the problem and the cost to Texas, because now only 100,000 are crossing the border instead of 2.7 million to be paid for. That would be my thought.
Well, let me say this. I'm assuming your estimate of illegal crossings are 2.7 million. Let's just assume it's 3 million, right?
Yeah, that was a number that was,
that's fine.
Given out at the end of the year.
That's fine. It doesn't matter if it's 2 million or 3 million. Here's a solution. Milton Friedman once said, illegal immigration works as long as it's illegal. Meaning, from an economic perspective, this country has an insatiable appetite for cheap labor. It's better to get an illegal alien to work for you in the service industry, the agricultural industry, the construction industry, or the meatpacking industry, than to pay a citizen $35 an hour plus 401k plus Social Security and all that stuff. It's a lot easier. Let's agree on that, right? If you're a business person and you can pay somebody $12 an hour versus $35 an hour, or let's say $22 an hour, which is what McDonald's is paying now, plus benefits, you're going to go for the $12 an hour guy. So illegal immigration works as long as it's illegal. We're not idiots in this country. We all know that if you go to Las Vegas and stay in any hotel, whether it's Wynn, the MGM, you walk down the halls and none of the service industry cleaning the rooms speak English. Hello? They're probably undocumented. Hey, but it's a subcontractor. Well, we can't track them down. So there's two solutions here. One, you want to end illegal immigration, you handcuff and make them do the perp walk of corporations that hire illegals. We don't have an appetite for domestic enforcement. We're not going to do that. Or we deport 19 million illegal aliens. We can't do that. Or number three, you have 2.7 million illegal crossings a year. Offer 2.7 million temporary work visas in the country of origin and let them come over legally. None of that is going to happen.
Well, that's one of the other partial solutions is we need more immigration in two places. We need it in the high-tech field, and the H-1B program does not allow enough people to be used in, so there's a dearth of somewhere, depending on who you're listening to.
All right, wait a minute, Professor. Because that segues great into what I want to talk about. That program of allowing intellectuals into this country is a problem. We do need high-tech individuals. We need physicians. We need researchers.
But the other thing, Orlando, is the second half of it is we need the low-grade workers you're talking about. So we need we need to loosen up, and at the bottom we need to actually have Congress come up with a law that says those people can have those 3 million.
I understand that. That's why I said you have 2.7 illegal crossings that are here for not asylum. Most of them are not eligible for asylum. No. They're here for economic reasons and security reasons. Let's face it. They want to eat. It's human nature. We issue 2.7 million temporary work visas. We track them in the United States, and everything's fine. We no longer have illegal immigration because those that are eligible and screened by the U.S. State Department can come on in. That's a doable system. But here's the thing. When you're talking about the HB1, is that what it's called, visas?
H-1B.
H-1B. During the Second World War, what did we do with the German scientists, Professor? We imported them into the United States. We invited Albert Einstein. We invited all of the brilliant scientists, physicists, and from Germany into the United States. So this week, a member of the legislature introduces a bill to ban the purchase of real estate by anyone from Russia, North Korea, Iran, and China. And I'm thinking to myself, are you kidding me? And the argument is, well, they could have access to our infrastructure. Okay. And then, as you know, Professor, let's just take, for example, the University of Houston down the street from you. The Center for Superconductivity. Who started that? Professor Chu, a Chinese. Who runs the center now? A Chinese. Who develops all these scientific advancements for research and development in the transmission of electricity? The Chinese. Who goes to American public universities supported by the American taxpayers and grants from the federal government? The Chinese. And so the idea that now we're going to take this group of brilliant researchers that have advanced research and development in this country and say, well, you can't participate in the economy. I mean, it's just weird.
Actually, in my recollection, the bulk of the H-1Bs that go wanting and where the people go back home is Indians. Mm-hmm. India has the greatest, in terms of the cohort of how many are left behind, it's Indians as opposed to even the Chinese. And I get what you're saying about the Chinese. I have a somewhat different view of that as the international security professor at the University of St.Thomas and somebody who spent 2 years in an office I can't talk about in Washington tracking Chinese students. But unfortunately, we do not have enough of useful internal investigative system, shall we say, to really catch as many Chinese as dump the stuff back in China. So sure, these guys are creating these high-tech platforms here in the United States, but most don't, but some do, then send it back to China. So China doesn't have to expend the cost to develop it, and they get a free ride on our technology. And more importantly, in the realm of international security, they catch up with us. That's the problem. They catch up with us. So,
Well,
I guess
agree. I agree, but why are we subsidizing their education and public? You know, they're taking advantage of grants. We're at the American taxpayer expense. We're educating them. I agree. I mean, but if you're going to do it wholesale. I mean, you know, this is very interesting, and it's baffling to me.
Well, in terms of government paying, I don't think that would be. I would agree with you on that. I don't think the government should be subsidizing that, whether that's through the FAFSA program or how else. That I'm not really familiar with the educational grants that go from the government to scholars, but to the extent that they're foreign nationals of any country, I don't think the U.S. should really be paying for that. Now, if the private university and its private donors, major company wants to set up a platform and they wish to pay for it, that's fine because they get the R&D out of that. But I don't think the federal government should be paying for foreign students at all.
Yeah, well, I don't think they are directly, but they're benefiting from the infrastructure, our education system. I'm going to let Andrea have the last word here. She's sort of absorbing all this. She's got 2 kids going to college. So.
Oh my God, I know. Well, it's fascinating. You know, immigration topic is always in this country one of the biggest issues, and it's one of the biggest thing also in any political campaign. And since we're saying, and since Ronald Reagan, we haven't seen any change on immigration. I mean, maybe few things, few amendments, and some change with DACA and TPS and things like that, but not really any major change. And then instead of fixing the situation with the immigration law, we're just allowing more people to come
well,
to
more
this
than
country.
that, you've heard me say, I think one of the sad consequences of just continuing on the path we're on, Professor, is that we're sort of beginning to build a permanent underclass in this country of Hispanics. You know, I just think as the Hispanic population in Texas grows, I'm going to say, and I've talked to a lot of Hispanics, this is what I hear on the streets, that they're creating a system where the majority sees us as service people. They don't see us as researchers and physicians. They see us as construction workers and, you know, meat packers and just service people. And that's not good for that segment of the society. That's just my comment from what I hear on the streets.
I agree and disagree with you. I think it changed a lot the last probably 20 years. The face of the Latinos, immigrants.
Tell me how many Hispanics are on the top 100 companies of the Greater Houston Partnership. How many Latinos are on the board of directors?
Okay, well, maybe no, but we know there's a lot of Latino CEOs and a lot of Latinos business. And actually, I was reading yesterday that
very few.
The small business are growing more in the Latino community. So it's been changing. It's just
okay.
Yeah,
how many Hispanics on the Houston City Council?
On the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. I mean, how many Hispanics? I mean, it's another topic.
Yeah.
But anyway, Doctor, your last thoughts about this and what we're expecting, not only this Texas legislature, but I mean, in federal government with immigration. What do you think? What is your, what is your internal and your thoughts that you guys are discussing over there in the University of St. Thomas?
And before you answer that question, Professor, I'm going to bid you a farewell. I've got a board meeting I've got to attend, and so I'm going to slip out while you're answering that for Andrea. God bless. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to having you again.
Thank you, Orlando. Andrea, I think the unfortunate thing is I think we're in a version, the lack of bipartisanship is going to harm most efforts at immigration reform. We desperately need it. All those different packages, whether we have a new type of a Bracero program to bring in a broad range of lesser folk, the basic service people that Orlando talks about, or we bring in H-1Bs at the higher level, whether we offshore the amnesty application as part of due process and send people home. I think that will be steps toward doing things better. The offshoring of amnesty could be done, I think, by presidential process under the current laws. I may be stretching the law a little bit there. But the unfortunate thing is, I go back to what I started the interview about. There is a middle that is a majority, but they can't seem to cross the aisle and get things done. So I'm not optimistic that much is going to happen in the next 2 years until we sort things out in the 2024 elections. I'm not sure. I would have to trust you in Orlando as our political commentators to give me an idea of how successful the bills being put in the Texas legislature might be. Most die, I know that, but I don't know on the immigration side. So I'm ever optimistic that some small things can be done. I'm less optimistic on some big reform.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, we always hear that in the first 100 days, I will go with immigration reform. I mean, I think it's 100 years, and we're not seeing anything. I'm not believing anymore in 100 days anymore. So
no, we need to go back to the era of Ronald Reagan, where a Republican led the charge to reform immigration, and that would not have been expected even back then, quite frankly.
Yep. Well, Doctor, thank you so much. It's always an honor to have you, and thank you for your time and for your thoughts. And for sure, we're going to have you again in the program. And thank you again, and thank you to Claudia that she always make it happen. Claudia is in the communications department at University of St. Thomas. Right. Well, thank you so much.
I'll say thank you for having me, and I'll say hi to Claudia too. She always looks out and gets me nice opportunities. Thank you very much, Andrea.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Doctor. Well, also, we have Leadership Latino coming up at the end of January. It's going to be January 27 and 28. You have all the information on the screen. Apply for our campaign boot camp. This is only for people that are seriously considering run for office or the current candidates. As we know, last year at the end of 2022, many people start signing to run for city council and other positions in the city in different cities across Texas and also counties. So if you are considering seriously running for office or you are already signed to be a candidate, so this is for you. At no cost, it's completely free as Leadership Latino. And here in Houston, also, if you're coming from out of Houston, we're going to cover the hotel, the accommodation, 100%, and also up to $200 in transportation, meaning if you decide to drive, so it is up to $200. So we're going to covering the gas expenses, or if you decide to travel in an airplane, so we're going to cover only up to $200. But mainly is everything that you're going to learn in our boot camp on the 27th and the 28th. Is a full day of classes with experts in the topics from A to Z. You're going to learn how to run for office from the moment that you register for the position, then raising money, ethics, compliance, how to deal with media, how to talk in camera, how to speak in public when you go for events and presentations. Everything counts when it comes to run for office. Is very, very important. But the most important is that you want to do it. It's that you want to go back to the community. You want to bring back to the community, and you want to represent our community. We are desperately need Latinos that want to be the leader of their community. We are 50% of the population in Houston. We are almost 50% of the population in Harris County. We are very close to that number around Texas, but we don't have representation in our local and state government. That's why we're doing this at Texas Latino Conservatives under the Leadership Latino program. So please go to our website, texaslatinoconservatives.com or leadershiplatino.com, and register. It's a completely free boot camp, and it's at the end of January 27 and 28 here in Houston. Thank you so much for being with us at Texas Latino Conservatives, supporting us at TLC Live every Wednesday. I'll see you guys next Wednesday. Nos vemos el próximo miércoles. Chao, chao.